These things where I come from are called Sarmi, and what they basically are sauerkraut wraps stuffed with rice and meat filling. When I think Sarmi, I think about winter and holidays, so this is something very dear and sentimental to me. There are however a few things that I see people doing wrong when they make Sarmi. They either undercook them, make them too wet, or they don't use enough fat. Now we're gonna address those things, but we're also gonna take it a step further, as we do. Sound good? Let's roll! We'll start with the filling. That's mainly rice and normally pork mince, but I decided that I want mine to have a little bit more bite. So instead of the mince, I'm gonna dice up some pork shoulder. Basically any cut of pork with a high fat content. By the way, here's a useful tip. You can hone the blade of your knife on the back of a plate. I'm using just half of this, which is about 1 kilo or just over 2 pounds. What I'm gonna do next is trim some of that fat, but I'm not gonna get rid of it. As I mentioned earlier, this dish really benefits from a lot of fat, so we're gonna put this to use later. You'll see how. And of course, feel free to use mincemeat if you like. This is just me being extra. That being said, it really makes a difference. There's actually a version of this, where whole pieces of pork shoulder get wrapped in sauerkraut leaves. So I guess this is a hybrid between the two. Then we're gonna dice up the meat as small as we can or want. And this is where a cleaver would really come in handy. I've been planning on getting one for a while, but you know, Christmas is coming. Just saying. This step is optional, but I do like to sear the meat before it goes in the filling. At this stage, I'm only gonna season it with salt. Make sure you don't crowd the pan. I did that in 2 batches so I don't steam the meat, but actually form a little bit of a crust. And I'm not really looking to cook the meat, I just want some color on one side. Next, we're gonna cut up some onions. I had just 1 yellow onion and a couple of shallots, so I'm gonna use both, but you use whatever you want. I hear leek is also really good in this. Into the same pan they go as the pork. They're gonna pick up all that fun that's left behind after searing the meat. In the meantime, we're gonna wash and rinse 1 cup of rice. In with the onions it goes, before seasoning with a big pinch of salt, a heaping tablespoon of paprika, and a teaspoon of čubrica for the Bulgarians, and for everybody else, that's summer savory. If you can't get your hands on savory, you can use some dried oregano. And lastly, about a dozen cranks of black pepper. Give everything a good stir and make sure everybody knows each other. Then add 1 cup of water and cook that down until the rice absorbs all the water. Make it rain rice on top of the meat, and then the meat is like, hey, what's going on? Add the rice to the meat, and our filling is done. Almost done. We need 1 last seasoning, with another big pinch of salt, and a teaspoon of chili flakes. Now our filling is done. Now onto the packaging. I've got a whole head of sauerkraut, and you need the whole thing, because we're gonna be peeling off leaves, and using those to wrap the stuffing in. Now, this is another optional step, but I like to snip off that big vein of the leaf. It's pretty tough and it's gonna make the wrapping kinda difficult, but I'm gonna save those too, and you'll see why. Then add a big spoon of the filling and just roll the whole leaf, tucking in the ends and creating a little parcel. Now before we transfer those beauties into the pot, we're gonna take another optional and a very extra step and line the bottom of that pot with some ribs. I got 2 little racks here that we're gonna have to season before we throw in, and for that we're gonna make a quick little dry rub. We'll combine a teaspoon of salt, about another teaspoon of freshly cracked black pepper, half a teaspoon of cumin, a teaspoon of paprika, a teaspoon of onion powder, and a teaspoon of garlic powder. Then give it all a good mix. Now we're gonna drizzle the racks with a little bit of neutral oil, just so that rub can stick to the ribs. Sprinkle the rub and massage it into the rack. Alright, let's try this again. Apply the spices onto the pork on both sides and we're ready to assemble. Coat the bottom of a deep baking dish with some neutral oil, and if you have it, one of these clay pots works really well. Then we're gonna lay down the ribs on the bottom of the pot. We're gonna take all of those off bits from the sauerkraut, give them a rough dice, and throw them in on the bottom with the ribs. Once we've covered the ribs completely, we're gonna throw in some seasoning. A few dried hot peppers, a few bay leaves, and all those bits of fat that we trimmed off the pork shoulder. Then arrange the rest of the wraps into another layer and pour in half a cup of water. as well as another few tablespoons of oil. Sauerkraut loves fat. Trust me, it's not too much, it needs it. Then if you have a lid, pop that on. Otherwise, just like I did, cover the whole thing with foil and poke in some vents. Then we're gonna pop those in the oven for 3 hours at 190 degrees Celsius or 375 Fahrenheit. And right before we take those out, we're gonna make one last dressing, if you will. Into some hot oil, we're gonna throw in a big tablespoon of chili flakes and a big tablespoon of paprika. Stir that in and cook it off for not more than 30 seconds. Be careful because the paprika burns very easily. Then take the pot out of the oven, uncover it, and spoon that dressing all over the wraps. Then tilt the pot and baste the wraps with some of that liquid that's on the bottom. That's gonna protect them from the heat of the oven because they're going back in for another 45 minutes uncovered. Turn the heat down and put them on one of the lower racks, but you're gonna have to keep an eye on them. If you want to go the extra mile, you can take out the wraps, pull out the ribs, and put them on top for those last 45 minutes. Trust me, it's worth it. Oh yeah, and don't forget to spoon over some of that sauce. Nostalgia probably has a lot to do with it, but this is some of the most comforting winter foods. It's just so hearty and savory and warming. Winter comfort in a leaf. Just remember, you do need to cook them long enough so that everything becomes tender. If you like sauerkraut, it's a must. Okay, presentation was over, the rest was just carnage. Roll out! Thank you for watching. The holidays are almost here, so come up with some tasty food to cook for your friends and family. In the meantime, stick around for a new video every Tuesday.